Good day, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Global CIO Forum and Arcon, I welcome all the online attendees to this live virtual summit titled Managing Information Risk While Working Remotely. Surveys reveal that 74% of CFOs believe some employees may decide to continue working remotely even after the pandemic comes to an end. Associated with this behavior are business continuity risks, authorization and authentication threats, and unsanctioned remote access to IT infrastructure. In this live virtual summit, we will understand how to build a well-defined strategy against business continuity risks, detection of poor authorization and authentication threats in your organization, as well as challenges due to unsanctioned remote access to IT infrastructure. Taking us through this live virtual summit is Anil Bhandari, Chief Mentor and Thought Leader at Arcon. So now, before I hand over to Anil, here are some short housekeeping rules. All attendees are on mute throughout the session. However, we encourage attendees to ask questions through the chat option, and Anil shall answer them at the end of the session. So welcome, Anil. Over to you for today's session.
So thank you, Arun. Really appreciate this, and I think you're absolutely right. There has been a tremendous interest in the market to understand how does this new normal likely to live up, and whether this new normal is actually the new normal or not. I would want to, you spoke about authorization, you spoke about the risk. I would want to take our audience today maybe a step back and first want them to reimagine how would even access look like in this new normal. And I've got a presentation which I'd like to quickly blow up, but aside that, I would also want to show a presentation, a couple of slides which I just happened to make in Munich maybe 4 or 5 days around vaults in the clouds as well, because I think the way that we look at access, authorization, is likely to change very, very quickly across the world. So bear with me for a minute, and I will try and shoot a presentation first, just to set the context. All right, so I'm hoping that this presentation is visible, Arun.
Yes, go ahead, Anil.
Thank you. So I think, of course, COVID-19, this has been spoken about now, and as world would have it, this is also kind of becoming a slightly old topic, but I think all of us appreciate the fact that COVID-19 has kind of transformed the world in terms of digitalization of business, trillions of dollars of investments coming into digital business, and especially if one were to look at Middle East, India, Asia Pacific, local companies here are really thriving this, and they're becoming fintechs and otherwise digital companies and driving up. And interestingly, while we're still in the COVID situation, the market seemed to be so-called rocking, as one would see every day in newspapers. So which is that the world, fortunately for all, continues to move forward even faster than what we would have probably imagined, only because, well, today I would say because of technology. And of course, we do have the scenario of work from home, but not only scenario of work from home, you today also have a scenario for learn from and can you imagine billions of billions, all of us put together across the world, almost 7 billion people that we have, online in some form or the other form, and literally the access has become a virtual access. During the pandemic, I'm sure all of the attendees here would have done something or other that we have put on the slide here. Every company would have invested in thousands and thousands of laptops, and I'm not sure about theirs, in a lot of places in the world, there was literally a queue for online stores or offline stores were available to actually buy laptops. And interestingly, all laptops have now been loaded with VPN. And there were times that VPN access was given to only tried and tested few in the market. And now I think almost everybody that we could think of would have a VPN access. Many companies have started investing in VDIs, thinking that there would be bring your own device, light clients, put up a huge VDI infrastructure to let people get into their environments and do their stuff from home. But however, there are challenges that we see in this. Besides the investment, of course, the challenges are licenses, huge cost. Sometimes the experience is very bad because the VPN solutions were never meant to give you a internet experience to access all kinds of applications, right? And worse than that is the IT operations now continue to struggle with not only they used to struggle with granting access within the organization. Can you imagine you suddenly put the entire IT operations team to struggle with granting access outside the organization, right? So I'm saying they literally struggle with what to give, how do you access control it, because the entire landscape, the threat landscape has completely gone through a change where, in fact, now customers are becoming threat agents for us, right? Because they could do anything. Employee threat agents were first internally, now externally. And I'm not saying all employees, of course, but the bad actors that we have there. And suddenly, because we've opened up our world to opened up our core technology assets to the world, I think you have more of the bad actors coming into play, trying to extract data, exfiltrate data, and so on and so forth. And for most companies, seamless access, of course, is important, and sometimes related because they're saying during the pandemic, business has to continue, salaries have to be paid, and even if there is a security threat, there is a security threat, so be it, and then we access it because business is first. And then you have the huge amounts of data transmission and just-in-time requests because you have new employees coming in, contractors still happen to access your systems, and they would all be having all of these kind of accesses coming up. So just to take everybody a step back, and I'm sure all of us here realize the challenges, realize the potential, but where do we work today? Unfortunately, given the fact that there is so much of technology advancement, but we still have to grapple with in-premise environment, hybrid environment, and cloud environments. And while there is a lot of traction and a lot of people talking about moving to cloud quickly, I don't think it would be possible for anyone to do that at a snap of a finger, because it takes a lot of time and energy to make sure that your business models are cloud enabled. And it may so happen, no, it's not so happen. I think I was having a chat with the Intel guys, and they're saying the edge computing is likely to become more and more powerful, which means if the edge computing is likely to become more and more powerful, then it is not only the cloud that you're going to live with in the future, it would actually be a very complex hybrid environment where you have edge computing sitting on your branches, sitting on your data centers, even your laptops, for all I care. You could have super edge computing happening here, and then there would be relevant parts happening and sitting in the cloud infrastructure. So well, today you have all of these applications sitting in premise, and then you have all of these applications sitting in the cloud, and you have a mix and a match, and security teams and IT operation teams now have to struggle with not just maybe one, but maybe a complexity of accesses that one would see in AWS or Azure and so on and so forth. Of course, conventional method, which still continues in a big way, was to have silos of accesses and security as one looks at it, right? And everybody wants some MFA and a dual factor and active directory authentication, but when you go to cloud, you have a different way that the cloud does access controls and a different way that the cloud would expect you to do authentication and authorization. So what happens is when this request comes to the technology team, and of course, because everybody wants it to happen fast, we'll end up taking decisions which are different for different scenarios, just to make sure that at least there is some security control around it, right? So essentially, what we live up to finally is doing protection on silos, and that is what is the scenario currently coming up in the market, that people are having to struggle with more technology tools sometimes than even the core solution that one would have. And this brings up more use cases around security threats for all of us put together. At the same time, while I spoke to you about the access, I would want to speak to you about the identity and the device today, right? Just as you have put these in silos, we are also looking at identities in silos, unfortunately. And we look at devices in silos, and security in the past was all device oriented. Unfortunately, that may not continue to be true in the next couple of years, because security has nothing to do with maybe some aspect of device, maybe some adaptive authentication usefulness of a device, but ideally it should have nothing to do with the device. It should be to do with what you're accessing, who's accessing, and where the data is stored, and so on and so forth. So this is, again, continues to be in a silo. And like I said before, the experience, of course, is not good, because when you have broken things happening, you have multiple authentication methodologies happening, multiple access methodologies happening, and on top of that, you put the VPN or a VDI infrastructure. This has to get complex, and there is, of course, a very important need for all of us to first get the slate white, and then start thinking of, how do I build this remote access? And why am I seeing remote access? I mean, how does it matter? Even if today I'm sitting in the office, I'm still sitting as an identity in the office, and for me, all I care, it could still be a remote access, right? So how do we kind of rethink through this entire thing to make sure that we're offering something which is really seamless to people? The conventional way that we hold this currently is something that I call high friction and low security. Why do I call it as high friction? Because of the complexities that you have. While you may have put hundreds of gates there, because there is a very high amount of friction at every gate, people try to dilute those gates and try and open them up as exceptions. And when you open up the as exceptions, you have to live with something which is high friction and eventually a low security. But of course, everybody's aim is to have low friction and high security, right? And that is where I think it's important for us to comprehend where are we going with this. There has been interesting discussions around even the VPNs and the VDIs that you're seeing today come up. And believe me, in the last 1 year, people would have invested millions and millions of dollars into this. But I think fundamentally, what people are looking at in the future is, I don't care whether there is a VPN working or a VDI working. What I care is, am I able to access what I want to access? And am I able to create an isolated session without having to do too many things around it? And this is a very interesting read for a lot of us here, and I would encourage our members here who are attending this today that one should start looking at a VPN-less world, because I think these are conventional ways of how you build security, and not how you're looking at, because the new normal actually is anyone, and this anyone and this identity could be even a machine identity. And this identity could be even an API identity, and this identity could be even a non-interactive identity, and this identity could even be a bots or robotics as an identity, and this identity could be actually even a human identity. And any device, and device agnostic is, of course, everybody understands this, but it could come from any device, and access could be anywhere, anytime, because now people are just happen to be sitting at home or in a cafe or anywhere that you go, and they still want to execute what they've been doing all across. So anyone, any device, anywhere, anytime. That is really the mantra that one should look at when somebody's trying to create a new way to access and a new way to govern, and a new way to offer remote accesses to people. So what one really needs as a solution is to try and create a layer on top of this, because how much ever you wish, you're not able to take away these silos, at least for the next 3 or 4 years, right? You would have to live with these silos. So if you have to live with these silos of in-premise and in-cloud and hybrid and edge computing, you still have to think through, how do you create a secure virtual access layer sitting across all your assets, wherever they are, and still making that experiential change for people, which would then result into a better security for you. And sometimes I really connect to this pretty well. I'm not sure if our audience today connects here with this, but the likes of Netflixes or OTT platforms, or even the likes of Zoom platforms, or for example, WebExes and GoToMeetings, they've kind of created this nice layer where people are able to get in, collaborate, and do what they have to do. And Netflix is a good example because you have OTT platform on the top with an access control layer, and then you have got content and assets sitting below that, and this content and asset is different as you go into different countries, different languages, but it is still able to seamlessly guide you. If you have an app, it still seamlessly guides you from where you are, what you're doing, with security built in, and you can still continue to do and access the content that you had, or continue from where you were. And if I were to bring this analogy and compare it to what one would really seek forward in our environment when they're accessing applications, then I think this could be a good one to consider from a low friction point of view. So just to summarize, I think we've kind of been cognizant of this problem statement and Archon in the last years, especially during the pandemic. We have kind of revisited our technologies. We have visited the entire world that one would need to activities, authorizations, globally, and we've created this nice secured virtual layer, which is very neatly able to sit as they are in premise or hybrid or in the, and they're able to all, it's able to consume all of that beautifully. So I think this is the kind of investments that we have made, and made sure that is able to handle not only a human identity but also a identity and a machine identity across various spectrums of what we have. And all of them are then able to consume this API layer or the vault layer to get into what you want to do, when you want to do, where you want to do, with a good just-in-time access control to make sure that you have this experience which will change eventually in terms of what you're saying. And on top of that, if you put in a small layer of passwordless authentication, which talks about the zero trust and continuous assessment based on the Carta or the zero trust model, a Carta model from Gartner, and a zero trust model from Forrester. But I think anything that you pick up, what essentially it means is, am I able to be adaptive? Am I able to change the goalposts if somebody is coming from somewhere? And are we still able to do the security and the controls in a very, very seamless manner? A lot of us here today in the audience have invested something like this, which may still be inside, and I'm sure they would be thinking through, how do we consolidate this? How do we create this into a nice approach? But one thing that one must remember is also just-in-time access and permanent access. Now, making a differentiation between these two is also absolutely a necessity today. And I think the world is moving more and more towards a just-in-time access rather than a permanent access, because the permanent access causes the biggest amount of damage that one could look at. And the just-in-time access, while it's still maturing and coming up, we have, for example, in this organization, achieved just-in-time access all the way from your access platform all the way to your assets, which means you're just coming in without any standing privileges. You're created in the access control framework. You are able to log in, and you're able to access an asset with a just-in-time provisioning of what you have. And once you've done what you've done, all of that is taken out, and only the logs are kept of what you've done, where you've come from, and so on and so forth. So I think these are the kind of use cases which would become very interesting in the coming up. And just to marry to how would one, I mean, I would definitely want to be in cloud without having to be in cloud, right? Now, our organizations and CEOs and CFOs are still worried about the fact, hey, what happens in the cloud? We have no idea what happens in the cloud, right? So what I'm trying to say is that it's okay to live with your hybrid environment, and it's also sometimes important to live with your hybrid environment, as long as you're able to create an experience which is good for people to be able to access assets anywhere and give the security of what the organization is looking at. And of course, when you look at the zero trust model, the visibility has to be strong. There has to be more granular access. Automation should be your focus. And finally, an automated response should be your focus. So just to kind of put this here, it's more in a conceptual nature, but when we kind of get into the tool and are able to demonstrate, one would realize how interesting this is. But what I'm trying to say is that if somebody comes from the internet, he should be able to seamlessly go through and create an isolated session without having a VDI, without having a VPN, because you can run the isolated session on our application streaming gateway, create an SSO or an authentication framework which meets all possible requirements. And Vault should be the new way of looking at an identity, because it's not only a human identity that you're dealing with, but you're dealing with a lot of identities that I spoke to you before. Interactive, non-interactive, robotics as an identity, APIs as an identity. If you're not able to create a good vault which takes care of authorization of all your credentials and identities and understand what is what actually, this is a human identity or this is a machine identity, and appropriately directed to the assets, then you would have lost a lot of connotation there. So the vaults are actually, well, let me put it this way. Archon believes in the vault first concept to make sure that you're able to digest all your identities appropriately and then give you seamless access. And this also lets you go through the cloud access. So which means you could be sitting at home, and on the right hand side you could be actually sitting in premise. Wherever you are, the system understands where it is going, and the system is able to neatly take you through the cloud, which means even if I'm sure all of us here would have heard about identity access management solutions, privilege access management solutions, access governance solutions, I'm saying it has to be a simple combination, not a complex combination of all. It has to be a simple combination of all, which could actually be delivered in the cloud as well. And we deliver this in the Microsoft Azure in the Middle East, and of course we can do that on AWS as well. It could be seamlessly delivered to all our clients, and somebody should be looking at a nice interactive platform to see what accesses one has. And if it has to move to a data center, for example, just do a toggle and you could look at all your data center assets if you have access to. And again, with all of the features of just-in-time access control. So if you have a platform which is as simple as simply this login screen and a toggle, I think your experience becomes slightly more better, easier, with all of the adaptive authentication requirements that one would look at. And which is very important now, we've kind of invested in an AI ML layer which sits below all that you do. And if you're able to now leverage on this AI ML model, it would start giving you a threat model, which is then going to be very interesting in the future, because now you've got the inputs coming in from bots, now you've got the inputs coming in from APIs, now you've got the inputs coming in from user access, target devices, applications, keystrokes, habits, all of that get in. And we've got a very interesting model. It actually learns for 3 months. So either if you have already some logs established, or if not, no problem, we'll establish the logs and we'll start learning it, and it's got a neural network and a deep learning model behind this. And then, of course, you have all of these red dots coming in terms of saying what is wrong, what is likely to happen, what is not likely to happen, which are the assets under threat, or which are the users who are risky users or who could become threat actors now rather than being threats. So this really meets the concept of I want my access now, I want my data now, I still want you to protect my privacy, and I still want you to make it simple for me. And that is the logic that Archon continues to build on top of to ensure that one is able to create value there. While I spoke to you about what one should look at in terms of access and authorization and getting into data center, it's also important now one should look at, and of course this will help you to create a low friction high security, but it's also important for you to look at what's happening on the endpoints, right? Because suddenly I think everything has changed. And when I say endpoint, I don't mean to say devices now, right? I'm saying we want to get out of devices. This is the conventional way. When you look at your endpoint, people wanted to harden it. The security team wants to harden it. They want to control the admin privilege. They want to do some endpoint protection, put some antivirus and stuff, try and do some installation rules, which means I will not let you install applications and stuff like that. This is passe. People and young kids are now all able to install and do whatever they want to do. So the technology maturity has gone up, and people are hungry to actually be able to do it quickly rather than waiting for an IT support guy and stuff like that. And on the top layer, people have built up authentication and LDAP and stuff like that. And but the conventional way is still device centric, right? So all of these explanation that I gave you is more and more on device centric. The hardening is device centric, installation, whether allowed or not, is device centric, and there is a very limited user context in all that you're trying to do. Now, if you want to marry this in the future, currently what you're trying to do is find the problem in a huge sea. I mean, like a huge bucket of water, you're actually trying to take out the drop which has got a problem. Now, that is no longer going to sustain you in the near future because world is moving too fast, and I'm sure all of us are aware about that. So I think what is going to look interesting in the near future is more likely to be around the second layer, which I've still not tagged, but I'm saying there has to be a layer which is sitting on top of your applications. And what is that layer? That layer is actually the user and the data context layer. And I'm not sure if we're getting the perspective here, but this is likely to become one of your most important layers to monitor, control, and understand and put it in the right context and baseline for the near future, right? And especially with remote accesses coming up, you have no visibility of what somebody's trying to do, whether he has his own asset or whether he has its organizational asset. What he's eventually doing is accessing data, doing something around it, accessing applications, doing something around it, and there is simply no visibility in terms of what one is looking at. And to top of it, the applications are now cloud-based, and the profile is dynamic, and the attack surface now is larger. So, what one would look at doing, and user behavior analytics is just one aspect of what I'm trying to say here. So let's not try and rush our thoughts that does this become into a user behavior analytics, that what is I'm trying to recommend. No, what I'm trying to recommend is the next generation protection. I'm trying to say there has to be a third layer of defense. I'm not saying you should take away all the layers that you built in, but there has to be a third layer which now helps you to do is get accesses on a just-in-time basis, even elevate accesses if required, because your maturity of people using the technology is better, integrated what as many solutions as possible, including collaborative solutions, and then try and make sure that you also do user behavior to ensure that there is a baseline. Now, coming to the context of user behavior, some of us here would have probably invested in tools like Splunk, which is fantastic because you look at the logs and you're trying to figure out what are the user behavior. Hey, you know what? User behavior is no longer based on the logs that you're trying to collect from application servers and database servers. It is the utilization of data. And none of these logs give you the context of what data I'm using, what is the Word file that I use, what did I do in there, what is the Excel file that I use, what did I do there, what is my role within an organization, which team am I part of, what exactly I do on a daily basis. All of that is just not available. So I would still, fantastic solutions, Splunk, so I'm not trying to degrade the solution, fantastic visualization, but eventually what you need to input is also a user data there. And that is where what I'm trying to say is solutions of a combination of an EPM and a UBA and a data contextualization become important. And that is what Archon has taught you in terms of trying to offer to the market to say that, hey, can I create the third layer of defense for you, where I'm not only able to understand adaptive authentication, I'm not only able to elevate your access, I'm not only able to do user behavior, but can I take your data stream? Can I classify the data stream into different aspects and then learn from the data stream in terms of what you're doing? And that, I believe, is one of our key fortes today as we speak. And this use case is becoming very, very interesting in the US market. As I speak to you, we would be running through several demos and POCs doing there, because I think everybody is looking at a way to track data and then combine that into a unified context and use it to protect your applications. So
Hi, Anil, can you hear me? Anil? Anil, we cannot hear your audio.
Very important role going forward. So, Arun, we'll probably figure that out later, but I don't know if you have any questions coming in from audience. I would love to respond to them, but from a message and from a foundational perspective, this is what I thought I would want to share with all of us here today.
Fantastic presentation, super key takeaways in that, and a couple of questions coming in, Anil. But just to flag, we had a little bit of audio breakdown, so if you would want to do a little bit of housekeeping at your end, just to see that your connection is okay. We had an audio break for about a minute just before that, and there was a bit of a problem, but seems to be stable now. Yeah, I think yeah, much better.
Cool. Please do let me know if there's any audio break.
Sure.
All right, cool.
So one of the questions coming in about, you've put one slide there about how to authenticate facial, biometric, OTP. I think this relates to that. With so many options, in your experience, which are the most practical and sufficient ones to adopt for an organization? Go ahead, Anil.
You know what is happening today is solutions have to be smart enough to offer all of this to you, right? So if you look at Archon, for example, we've inbuilt facial recognition, inbuilt biometrics, inbuilt OTP, SMS, inbuilt mobile soft token, hard token, all of that is built in. Now, the question is, which is more secure? I think all of them have their own security layers and the way that one is able to authenticate yourself. So I would call all of them equal in terms of authentication because they all have merits, right? But why is it interesting to have all of these bundled into one? Because there are times that some options may not work for a user. And because you want to make sure that the user behavior is, because your user experience is good, and he should be able to log in at any point in time with security that you would want, then he could choose what works for him at what point in time. So, of course, if you ask me, facial recognition is becoming more and more interesting as we go forward. And that would be here to last, because if you look at iPhones and the way technology has come in for 3D facial recognition, I think that would be something which will continue to grow and the market would continue to grow. And one, that is something that somebody should look at when they're evaluating any product, because I think eventually cameras are likely to be on, you're working from remote, you don't want people behind sometimes, and you would want to track that. They also have a pro and a con, and the con is, of course, you would get into questions around privacy going forward. But hey, you know, there are times when you would want to grow on top of those privacy questions and say, if you're working for an organization, what we're expecting is that you're sitting in a decent environment. It could be at home or it could be outside, and you are doing your work in the way and the manner professionally one is required to do. Because at the end of the day, this is not a college that we are sitting in and we could do work around wherever we would like to do. So these are some questions that would still have to be answered. But I'm saying that facial recognition definitely is becoming an important element of what we do.
Very interesting, especially just one second. Let me also switch on my video if you don't mind. And then let me get all. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
So,
Sure, please.
yeah. Another question. You mentioned obviously that the identities are not just human, which is very fundamental point. Would these apply to the bots and the other device, the machine identities?
Of course, I think you know what organizations have started to have more bots than employees, right? So in any large organization like a bank or any company today, they are doing automation projects, and for you to do small use cases around automation projects, you have to come out with one bots. And there are bots which are smaller bots doing just some very quick function, and there are larger bots which do multiple rounds of function. So I wouldn't be surprised, Arun, if an organization has, say, for example, 100 employees, they may actually have 200 bots for all I care, but at least they would end up having 100 bots, which means the life cycle of the bots now start becoming to be a question mark for all these organizations. And you would have to have a platform to authenticate it, change it, because you have hard-coded passwords sitting in the bot, and that would just not work because you've suddenly opened another gate for people.
Next question. You mentioned a lot about the intuitive, the analytical layer which tracks the user behavior pattern. And question which is coming in here is that is this like password rotation Is it at a scalable password? What is the difference between the two? Go ahead.
No, there is nothing to do with password rotation here. Of course, password rotation will also become one element of what we are looking at, right? Because in the vault, you would need to rotate everything. I mean, every IT security policy says that the human is required to change his password every 30 days. And I think this 30 days is only going to become 15, and it's only going to become 5 and then 1. And then maybe you'll not have passwords in the world at all. And that's also something that all of us are working towards. But today, what I'm trying to demonstrate on the screen here is there are a lot of inputs which come into a system. And these lot of inputs come from a lot of places: geolocation, browser that you're using, device that you're using. These are one. You can use that for adaptive authentication to say, hey, you know what? You were in Dubai yesterday, suddenly you seem to be in Canada. It could be right, it could be wrong, right? Because you might have just flown over to Canada. And then the system needs to react to that. So those are small use cases, and tools available in the market to address adaptive authentication. But let's look at a little larger stream. The largest stream is that while you are where you are, what you access. And that data is far more important, right? So what's your pattern of access? What is it that you work on? Just imagine if you have that data stream available in your AI ML model, then you have a far superior output, a far superior outcome, right? Than just maybe 4 geologging or textualing. Or what I'm saying is you put all of and as much as you can get into our box, and that will help you to create behavioral.
Interesting. And you also showed the the four aspects of low friction. So practically, what happens to an end user's access? I mean, is it intuitive that the password is changed, or is it the access is changed? Does the user actually get affected? Do they get notifications? What actually happens if you have that?
Yeah, the user just doesn't have to. I'm saying a solution should be that the user just doesn't have to imagine anything. I mean, he just has to log on. If it's passwordless, he just puts his wristwatch there, or a phone there, or maybe one OTP there, and he should have his applications popping up to him, right? And maybe the last application what he left should be the first one to come up, for all I care, right? So these are intuitive use cases that one needs to build up in any of the solutions, right? And then that makes it very interesting for, say, for example, the user is constantly required to access accounting solution because he's part of the accounts team, right? The least that you could do for him is when he logs onto the system, open up the accounting solution and be ready for him. Say, hey, good morning, right? Let me know what you would like to do, something like that, right? So because based on the past learning experience and the AI/ML model that you have, you know that 90% of the time this is what he does. Or maybe he just opens up his email box every time. Maybe you can open both of them and keep it, right? And this technology that probably I'm trying to talk about has the ability to execute any of these applications and keep it ready for you.
Interesting point over there. Therefore, for the IT support team, which is trying to go into low friction, are you saying automation is the norm, or how do they actually service their customers with low friction?
So what I'm trying to say is that the low friction actually means removing a lot of gates. It's a little different from putting a lot of security gates, right? So currently we put multiple security gates, and like I started my presentation by saying that maybe today we have more security products than the core application also sometimes, right? And that itself becomes difficult to manage. So what one needs to do is simplify the grant and the authorization first, very, very important, and make sure that it is happening in a seamless manner where nobody comes and asks you for exceptions. Now, that is the worst thing to do. Put up a security solution and ask for an exception. And if people are not asking for exceptions again and again, because now they don't have to go through 3 gates, and sometimes one would work and sometimes one would not work, then this is really low friction, because then people like to use it, right? And then if people like to use it, they will get adapted to the security and they would use it more and more. And that would make your outcome as a positive outcome within the organization, right? So that is what I really meant by low friction but high security, because you are adapting to the security platform very seamlessly, and then it is able to leverage in what you want.
Interesting. Yes, I think a key
So
point
just to
which you
again maybe add
yeah,
an
please.
example there, Arun, like, today you have a VPN solution, for example. You do access control layer on the VPN solution. Then you do access control layer on first the VPN solution itself, who can come, who cannot come. Then you do an access control layer on who can come and go where and where he cannot go, right? And then once he gets into the application or maybe sometimes even a desktop, who can do what he cannot do, right? You're actually struggling through a complex web of access matrices. And that is something what I'm trying to say we should keep simplifying because it's become too complex now.
I think I like that key takeaway where you said that users would get used to the adaptive mode of having access, and it becomes more and more intuitive. Whatever they're doing, they get access. Whatever they're not doing, obviously would need a different approach. But I have one question coming up over here from one of our attendees, and I think Anil, maybe you will need to interpret this. The question is as follows: briefly, how would the third layer of defense, EAC, be applied?
Fantastic. I think a very good question because building up a data context layer for eventually building up a good security is going to be very, very important. And it's not going to happen overnight. But I must tell you this, interestingly, one of our products is able to stream it very seamlessly and then try and create structures around it. So technology is available. Maybe all use cases may take a little time for us to, grapple and come back with. But the moment you start putting that in a box and create a data contextual layer for access control, then that would be the ultimate and the ideal goal because then you have done away with all this complex web layers, right? Access matrices layers, because now you actually know what Anil is doing in the organization and you know to the detail of T, right? That Anil comes in from this technology, this device, comes in the morning, this is the way that he keys in, and this is exactly the work that he does in his department, right? He opens up a Word document, creates maybe a power of attorney if you're a lawyer, works in his department, creates maybe an Excel sheet, and that's what one does. And if you look at our profiles, Arun, more or less, they're very repetitive in nature. There are very few people who work on like different things every different day, right? So there is definitely a layer of baselining that you can do there. And to talk to you today, it's not so difficult because of the models that we've built in. And once you're able to build in this learning model, then I'm constantly learning what Anil is doing. In fact, I'm saying to the extent that I could actually do what Anil is doing. I mean, from automation. And actually, I could come back and the solution can come back and suggest that Anil puts in 8 hours trying to do reconciliation on an Excel sheet. He is the best case for automation by creating an Anil bot by helping him to do reconciliation faster. So I'm not only talking about security, but once you get the contextual layer, you're able to bring in process improvisation and take the organization to the next level. So I think the third line of defense, while it acts as a defense because I've got small pieces of data elements, actually is a much larger, can be a much larger goal for anybody to look at. First, to get to this layer. And getting to this layer is very, very important.
Thank you, Anil. So I hope that answers the question for the attendee. In case it doesn't, you can just pop in another line or two and Anil will continue with that. Another question for you, Anil. Can we come up with a security score for the department on the basis of logs collected by the EPM at endpoints for that department?
Oh yeah, we could easily. And in fact, the dashboards that are coming up now are just coming up based on use cases. So, and as they're flying, and I think this is currently very, very hot in the US market. I must say that. I think it is just about time that it will start coming up and becoming very interesting here. So anybody who's, who's desirous of taking this a little faster should definitely reach out to us or anybody. I mean, I'm saying these are something really, the dashboards are interesting. You could keep creating different dashboards and keep putting more use cases in there. Because can you imagine, now I'm sitting on a box and I have a full control of what is happening around it. So we could create like 500 dashboards around it. Yeah.
Anil, to go back to one of the points which you mentioned in the beginning was the current scenario where there are too many agents sitting on a laptop. What is the pro and con of this? I mean, does this actually affect? Is it a good way of doing it? It was an intermediate way.
There
How do you
are too
discuss
many.
it?
There are too many agents sitting on the laptop today. You have antiviruses, and then everybody comes and sells one use case. So, and that is why that is another reason today that we have invested in something like this, which does a combination of 3 or 4 things or 5 things. So you're able to replace a couple of agents on the desktop, because the DLPs of the world have become pretty simple now, Arun, if you look at it. So there are DLP features built into this product, because I'm saying if I'm looking at data, then everything else should be given. So I'm saying DLP principles would become even stronger if you have a product like ours, or the technology that I'm talking about, not necessarily product like ours, but similar to what we're trying to do. So what I'm saying is fundamentally you should run away from a lot of solutions on your desktop and try and keep consolidating them into very few. And it could be this solution or any other, but you should try and make sure that you're consolidating. That also becomes a very important part in low friction and high security.
Interesting over there. A few more questions before we wrap up. Therefore, from the Archon point of view, you mentioned about the Archon solution for the securing the virtual layer, the virtual access layer. And does Archon believe in delivering this through the cloud? What part of it has to be on premises? What part is from the cloud? How does this actually work?
I think interestingly, I could never imagine that we would put some of our most critical and important assets like passwords or privileged passwords or whatever in the cloud. But I think pandemic has, kind of fast forward the thought process in minds of the people. And I think the acceptability of the market, at least in the West, is very cloud centric. So our strategy definitely evolves from also the needs of the customers and the minds of the customers. So I think while we had a conventional way of thinking that cloud may not be so acceptable to a lot of people like banks and stuff like that, but there is another use case there. So banks are saying that we're not happy for you to put this in the cloud, but I want a DR right? So if you want a DR in the cloud, you still live with whatever your credentials are still in the cloud. So in a way, they're also okay to do this in the cloud. So I think our methodology now is that all of these products are a lot of cloud-centric products, because the more and more it's cloud-centric, you're able to build larger use cases around these products, right? So we would deliver all of this in the cloud. We can today deliver this in a hybrid environment as well. So we are not running away from a fact that we don't want to do in-premise or hybrid today. But I think the long-term strategy would be to fall into cloud. Yeah. Now, maybe long-term means maybe a year and a half, 2 year, it would move to cloud. Yeah.
So cloud obviously being private or public, depending on how the customer wishes. Very interesting.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
I mean,
so now,
even in the cloud, Arun, you can always create an extended arm of your data center. So while the service is offered in the cloud, but some elements could be an extended arm in a VPN kind of an environment, just a site to site. So there are a lot of things that you can do to just make sure that you protect it from your mind share perspective and what the culture is in an organization. So I don't think it's too difficult for one to achieve that.
Great. I'm sure Archon obviously has a lot of experience in deploying this. Like you said, the West definitely a level or two ahead of us, and with a good experience that you can share. Coming back again, just to recap the whole thing. So, is zero trust? I mean, considering your experiences in the West and all that, and the cloud which you mentioned, is zero trust becoming the accepted new normal? Or is it more that an automated zero trust? I mean, what is the vision over there? Go ahead.
No, I think the accepted model in the world is that you continuously keep assessing somebody. So in God we trust, in everybody else we assess, right? So I think that is likely to stay, whether you want to call it zero trust or something like that. But I'm saying I just want to reiterate, in God we trust, in or in whatever that we trust. But I think everything else that we would want to assess. So I think following that same methodology, I think these would evolve over a period of time, and people would have to keep assessing who's coming in, where he's coming in from, and this model is likely to survive, Arun. I think it will be there. It will only become more refined, mature over a period of time, and intuitive over a period of time.
Interesting. And like you said, you're using behavior analytics And that combined with, let's say, an existing policy. I mean, you need to start with an existing policy. Am I right over there?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what I'm trying
And
to tell you guys is that you need to build up first a layer which is able to deal with your different models that you have in the data center or in your office, like hybrid, premise, cloud. Let's try and first do the first step. Let's try and create a nice layer where everybody is able to come in. The second is, how do you leverage if you're able to do this layer? And the third is that if you're really fast forward looking, how do you implement which will help you to get to your data access, in the sense that how do I stream your data and make sure that I make it more useful. So I think these are basically 1, 2, 3 steps that anybody would want to look at. And if it's already a mature organization, then I think we should really get into data very quickly. Because if I ask a question to my audience today, do you know in your organization who's the most riskiest user in terms of what data he has and what he's doing? I wouldn't get an answer. And I might be spending millions of dollars trying to protect maybe some outsourcing company which is just doing some basic amount of work for me. Whereas somebody sitting inside would be carrying so much amount of data that my focus should be on trying to secure that team or that set of identities of people to make sure that I'm putting my dollars at the right place. So I mean, just to simply answer that question, I think we would need to build in a contextual layer.
very interesting over there. So is there a possibility of making some sort of checklist for what organizations should do, or is there a migration path, or is there a today and tomorrow type of a scenario to move to? How would you look at it?
Well, of course, there is a checklist. Maybe if you can make me a presenter, I'll just quickly blow one slide about digital risk, which people may want to look at.
Sure.
Let me see
Ronak,
if I
can you
can.
give the access page?
All right, so I will just take you through. Just give me only a minute, and
So, Anil, you're on mute, please.
yeah, okay. So are you able to see this? Okay, quickly, I'll just take you through one slide. If you asked me an interesting question, that's all. You know, if your organization is investing in the cloud, in creating a digital world for yourself, you would need to break your organization into a front office, middle office, and a back office. And you would have to figure out what are the cloud adoption techniques that your organization is using. What are the mobile apps? A digital organization is not only mobile apps, right? So you'd have to. It's a full-blown end-to-end digital company, which is looking at important here, not just one initiative. So an app can be just one initiative. So are you fitting in a digital app? Are you doing a WhatsApp integration? Are you doing eKYCs, for example? And if it's an insurance company that in the middle office, are you looking at auto claims and auto underwriting? Are you looking at automated processes, approval processes? Are you looking at chatbot to improve an experience that you have? Now, if you have something coming up like this, right, then what I spoke to you about, making sure that the data context comes out very well, becomes more and more important, because you also need to then put in an automated risk management profile that one has to have, correct? So I think this is where the world is going towards. And we would need to be careful to ensure that all of these elements. So, like for example, you have a separate team in the middle office. You have a separate team in the back office. Their roles are different. Their data contextualization and baselining will be different. You have now a completely different team in the front office. So, entire risk management framework will change.
Interesting, and I think the cloud obviously requires this segmentation and clear distinctions between the back office, middle office, and front office, and we keep hearing about that in any of the
Correct.
cloud journey. any of the cloud journeys, and obviously security then needs to fall into place that you were mentioning, Anil. So I think now we need to come to an end. I'm just checking if there are any other questions. I don't see any other questions right now. So I'd like to ask you, Anil, if you can summarize, give some key takeaways, recommendations for the attendees before we close. Go ahead.
So I think I've said this before, Arun. I think it is now time for our attendees to look at, and with the CIOs or CISOs, for two things: not only security but building a digitally aware organization. And you're only a digitally aware organization when you have the data points, right? Otherwise, it's one thing to talk about it and other thing to actually do it. And then finally, a digital organization once you have all of these points. And in doing that, I think creating a data contextual layer becomes very, very important, and making sure that your entire ability to create an access control and authorization layer for any amounts of identity also is so seamless that eventually it will be able to ride on the data contextual layer. Today, I have not tried to propagate access authorization on a data contextual layer, but tomorrow, if you have the data contextual layer, the next automated journey is also maybe doing authentication and authorization based on data contextual layer. I give you all access that you want in an application. But once I know what you're doing, I will automatically just scale everything down and just give you what you've been doing, because that's what you've been doing. So that could become the future. But I think one should start somewhere with use cases. And I think this could become a very, it is actually a low hanging fruit and a fantastic outcome for people to demonstrate even to their top management that, look, my first reaction would be if somebody comes to me and says, I know these are the 4 guys in your organization who are very important when it comes to data. Oh my God. I mean, I will, I will not sleep. I would want to ensure that everything is secured in terms of, these 4 assets or wherever I go. So I'm saying, even if somebody is able to blow up a report like this, is amazingly important for a CEO or a compliance guy or anybody today.
Very interesting. And obviously, these people could be either the front office, back office, or middle office. You don't know, and they're not necessarily just in finance.
Correct.
Absolutely fascinating, Anil. So with that, I'd like to come to the end of this session. So on behalf of Global CIO Forum, Archon and Anil over here, I thank all the attendees for joining us and look forward to seeing you once again. Goodbye, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you. I appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.